I'm Matthew Lombard. I'm the president of the International Society for Presence Research, and I'm an associate professor in the School of Communications and Theater at Temple University in Philadelphia. And I've been doing all those things for several years. I've been at Temple since the early 90s. One project is trying to take all the different definitions that people have put forward for presence and putting them into a scheme, a typology, so that there's a unification of, maybe a winnowing down of some of the duplicating efforts that have happened for defining presence. So that's one project, and we have a long-term project that we're doing related to portrayals of telepresence in popular culture. So movies, television shows, one-off things and series and novels and eventually even comic strips, things and video games and all kinds of places where it's not that the media presentation evokes presence in the user or viewer, but it actually portrays people having presence experiences. And so we want to know what kind of things are portrayed as an indication of what are people's concerns about how the technology might be used. If you think of classic references like Blade Runner and the Terminator and the holodeck on Star Trek, and there's negative views and positive views, and there are different kinds of technologies portrayed. And so what can you glean from these, how science fiction leads reality? So what are people thinking now about how presence will be used, and what do they fear about, and what do they want to have happen as a result of the new technologies that are being developed? So that's an interesting project that we're doing, and I could go on. There are various other things, but the ISPR is sort of a project in itself, because there's this whole effort to bring the community together. It's a very disparate, spread out, multidisciplinary, group. And one thing we've done recently, and it's actually a paper in the Psychology Journal and also on the ISPR website, a systematic method for identifying the telepresence literature across all kinds of different fields and databases. If you look in any one database, like you go to the library and their research databases, you search for, it's another whole problem, the fact that it's hard to search for presence, but if you search for telepresence and several related words so that you get the literature on telepresence, you get an interesting subset of the field, but all kinds of things are missing because there's no one database that has it. So we've created a systematic way of doing the searches and updating them across databases, and compiled all the references and the abstracts for the references in a single place on the ISPR website. So that's a project for ISPR, and also a personal project, a way of, again, sort of bringing the community together in a way that, if you're interested in a presence question, instead of having to look in all the places that you might think or you might not think, of looking, this way you can go to one place and say, oh, has anyone done this kind of thing? And it includes everything from the traditional telepresence studies that people know to things that I wasn't even aware of, where people use the phrase sense of presence, but they're not talking about a technology-based experience. They're talking about you have a sleep condition where in the middle of sleep you have the sense of you wake up startled, you have the sense of the presence of somebody in the room, or the presence of somebody who's passed away and who you miss terribly, you have the sense of their presence. So you find out all kinds of interesting sort of relatives and variations on the terms that we use. And when you read some of those articles, you find, it raises interesting questions and interesting ideas for relating it to the kind of work that people are doing in quote unquote our field, even though it's such a broad concept as it is. So that's an interesting project too. Well, in I guess it's 1997, Teresa Ditton, who was a PhD student at the time and is now an alum of our our doctoral program at Temple, and I wrote the piece at the heart of it all, the concept of presence, and in that we looked at a lot of in some ways seemingly unrelated phenomena that all seemed to have something that tied it together, which was this concept of presence. And when we looked at what that thread was that was in common across all the phenomena and the literatures that we were looking at, we labeled it the illusion of non-mediation. And so that's explicated in more detail in that piece. But I largely still subscribe to that definition, but I also understand why people say, you're asked in the elevator or something, or at a dinner party, well, what is presence? And people say, oh, it's a sense of being there in a virtual environment or in a mediated environment, and then you use the virtual reality example, and that seems to get people to understand what you're talking about, the public, but it's not I think the limitation of that is that it's too narrow, because there are all kinds of phenomena where people don't, either purposefully or not, they experience technology in a way that is not accurate, that they misconstrue the way technology is playing a role in their experience. And even things as relatively simple and seemingly uninteresting as the fact that I'm wearing glasses because I have very poor vision, and people with hearing problems, the same thing. Assuming the technology is good enough, you come to the conclusion very quickly. You habituate to the technology, and you don't think, oh, I'm wearing glasses. I think when I realize I have to put my head down and look over them because I'm looking at something at the wrong distance, I need bifocals or whatever, then I become aware of it. But the rest of the time, it's invisible to me. It's transparent. So the technology is transparent. So I think there's a deeper thing that's going on. There's a broader concept to look at than just the very narrow sort of, well, I'm in a virtual environment that has these characteristics. And in the just recently, in the last couple of years, the video conferencing and computing industry, some very big players have started really promoting the idea of telepresence as a high-end meeting tool where you can have people in different cities or anywhere in the world, and in each city people go into a room and sit at a nice conference table and seemingly interact as if they were in the same room with people in the other room, which is an identical room, but it's in another country, and over high-speed communications and with very, very high-definition monitors and sound that follows with mics around the room so that the person's voice seems to follow their image. You get the sense, and you start to forget about the fact that you're using a very sophisticated technology. And it's really interesting. They have the conference table set up. It's almost as if it was designed by somebody who was a telepresence scholar, because we would say, well, hide all the technology as much as possible so that it doesn't ruin that illusion. It doesn't cause a break in presence, when people notice the technology. So they've really done that. It's just a meeting room, and all you do is basically push a button, and it starts this conversation, and people show up on the other screens, and you start talking to them. And in talking to the companies that have these products, in their having initial interactions, using these technologies, they've noticed how people seem to forget at times that they're not in the same room, even to the point where somebody will stand up at the end of the meeting and try to shake the hand of the person at the other end, and it's like, oh, that won't work, because that same process is going on where we're not evolved to deal with media in some special, unique way, and always have on our little, yes, I'm using the media, and I know this is created by somebody. Same thing when it doesn't have to be a high-tech experience. It can be just watching television, and if it's well acted and or well performed, in the case of talk show hosts who look straight at the camera and act as if they're talking to you at home in your living room, and they even say things like we'll be right back, as if they're leaving and then they're coming back, or thanks for inviting us into your living room tonight. And there are all these very simple, subtle cues that performers use, and when it's scripted, that well produced things can produce, like, if the script is very well written and the acting is very good and it seems to be a realistic, at least people are acting as if you might expect people to act in whatever situation is being portrayed, and you can even at least imagine the situation happening, then you treat that as if, at some level, as if those people are real, and it doesn't mean that you're psychologically disturbed, and although a very extreme form of it, of course, is where people confuse actors for the characters they play. But the idea that you can take that seriously and get so engaged that people cry, or they laugh with the person as opposed to just laughing at them, or they feel like they have a relationship with the people that they see, even though the people are characters. If you watch series like Law and Order, you see the same bit characters, New York actors show up in different episodes in different roles. And it's amazing to me when that happens, I notice that's an actor who I've seen before in another role on this show, and that disturbs my sense of presence in this general sense. But then, after a few minutes, it's like, oh yeah, he's that person now, and I don't think about it. The fact that you can buy into that, the same thing with like Schwarzenegger movies or something, it's like he's playing a different character with different motivations and a different history in different movies, even if the movies are sometimes similar. They are different in many ways, and yet you can say, oh, I'm gonna get into this. I'm gonna feel the arousal, and I'm gonna laugh or cry or whatever it is. Schwarzenegger might not be the perfect example, but there are a lot of actors where that is true, and I just find that phenomenon fascinating, that you can they call it the willing suspension of disbelief, whatever you want to call it. We want that illusion, and it's not illusion in a bad way. Some people define presence in a way that it sounds like, oh, it's a negative to have this illusion, like we're being duped as the consumer. But we want that. We want that experience. So I find all that stuff fascinating, and I'd hate to have a definition this is a long answer to your question. I'd hate to have a definition that limits presence to just a very specific subset of that, because I think all of those things have something very, very fundamental, very closely related. So. The danger of having this broad definition, of course, is then you have, everybody says, this is presence, or that's presence, or the other thing is, and I've been very frustrated, especially recently as we've worked on this project to identify the literature and the definitions, that people aren't explicit enough about their definitions, and they often invent new terms and new definitions that are very closely aligned with other things that have already been done. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that, and there's no rules against it. But I would like to see exactly what you're asking about, more focus in the sense of identifying overlapping but inconsistent, terminology and definitions. And we don't want to. I'm very sensitive to. You don't want to go tell people, okay, well, you can't do this anymore, and you can't use that word. But if we can make people more aware of what has been done that's similar, and have them sort of work out, well, do you really need this term for this thing when we have one that's close, and how do you maybe get those people together and maybe we can sort of clear the underbrush in the field so that we can identify the core things. So So the answer is yes. I do think we need more focus, but it has to be done carefully. You don't want to institute it from on high. So. A science or a technology? Oh, that's a good question. The people who do these high-end video conferencing systems that I was describing, many of them describe it as a technology. It's telepresence is the tools that we create, the products that we create and want to sell that allow you to have this experience. But I am definitely of the opinion that telepresence is not a technology. It's a property of a person, not a thing. I experience telepresence, it's a property of me as the user or consumer. So there might be technologies that are very likely to evoke this sense of illusion of non-mediation, or the sense of being there, or whatever terminology you want to use. But it's not guaranteed. It all happens in your head as the consumer or the user. It's or the player or whatever it is. You have to experience it, and so it's definitely, I would not say it's a technology. it's part of a person. It's a psychological or physiological individual experience. I don't know what it would mean to say that it's a science. What does it mean to say telepresence is a science? I don't, if you mean is the field scientific versus we don't have the rigor of a scientific exploration and understanding of the telepresence experience, then I'd say, you know, we're on the path toward that level of understanding, but we don't have it now. So I wouldn't say it's a science or a technology. It's not a science, but the field, it's different to ask about the field versus to ask about the phenomenon. The field and the phenomenon are different. I would say the field is a very interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary or cross-disciplinary. Some people care about the distinctions between those terms, but obviously it includes people who are interested in presence phenomena from all kinds of different perspectives, with different academic training, and some in, you know, like I say, in the business world, not with academic training, but from a purely practical point of view. But if you just look at the academic side of the study of telepresence, I would say it's a field that is not yet scientific, but it has become, even in the, you know, we're here at the 10th annual Presence Conference, sponsored by ISPR, and over those 10 years, I think it has gotten progressively more. I said this morning in the talk with Winan that we're asking better, deeper questions, and not just talking about basic debates about definition and measurement, but actually merging those issues with specific applications in a wide range of areas. And so we are becoming a more mature field. Whether that means I don't know what it means to say we're scientific or not really, but we're definitely becoming more rigorous and more able to answer the questions that people are asking about presence.